you need to be realistic as to sort of how far, and this would be, again, not just in the Philippines, I would say in any business, if I'm to try and hire someone in a role that I know nothing about and they don't have the proven track record and I can't actually see that, then it's a risk.
Well, I think software development is very much the same with this. Like we have over 60 clients that we work with, and the ones that are the most successful have some form of dev leadership in-house, right? If you came to me and you're like, I don't know anything about software development, I need to hire a software developer and they're magically going to come in and solve all of my problems. Like, it's very difficult for that to happen. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's much more difficult, right? And we're back for another episode of the Startup Hustle. This is your host, Matt Watson. Very excited to be joined today by Mr. Yoni Kozminski, who was on the podcast before, actually, about his company Escala. But today we're going to talk about what it's like to hire people in the Philippines. He's got hundreds of employees in the Philippines with Multiply Me. If you've got some kind of role that you think you need help with, he potentially could help you. So it's very similar business to mine at Fullscale, except at Fullscale we focus on software development and he focuses on mostly everything else. A lot of different roles. Again, if you need to hire software developers, remember, check us out at Fullscale, fullscale.io. Yoni, welcome to the show, man.
Matt, it's a pleasure to be back. And, obviously we got carried a little bit away having such a love for both the Philippines and the types of businesses that we're in. So it's glad to be here in what I would say is probably a safe space and someone who really understands the challenges and the joys that, I get to experience on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I recently started a Telegram group actually with some other software development agency groups, and that's what I told all of them. Like, we need a safe space to cry in once in a while.
The trick is that the clients are always wrong, right? Isn't that how it?
Oh, sometimes they are. Not sometimes they are. So how did you get into this? Like, I know you have some other businesses. Did you originally hire people in the Philippines as kind of a byproduct, and then realize other people could use this? Like, how did you get into this?
Yeah, so it's kind of that journey. I spent about a decade in creative advertising and digital marketing, and was working with some brands that you might know, like Sony, MasterCard, Mercedes-Benz, Medtronic, and was always working with like really high caliber talent on my team, from web development, design, content production, TV commercials, locally in Australia and the US. And when I sort of stumbled upon, I would say, like emerging world talent, and worked with a lot of different geographies in India and Pakistan, the Philippines, the list goes on. I just happened upon someone who was extremely talented. She just really it was a paradigm shift for me in what was capable, or what the Philippines in particular were capable of from a service delivery perspective. It wasn't like VA baseline tasks, but rather like this was a high level project manager who'd worked with, some of the largest brands in the world. And I guess what had happened is that I'd always thought that I needed to find, these 6-figure talented people, sitting by my side. And when that happened, I just realized like this could be huge. So I actually ended up building an agency for an e-commerce business internally. That business grew from 2 to 5 million in 12 months. It was subsequently acquired. And on the back of that, instead of going down the e-commerce route again myself, I said, you know what? We could help a lot of people if they just understood not just where to look and how to find better talent than sort of quote unquote VAs, but also how to build remote teams.
Which makes total sense. And, you started this right before COVID, right? So it's like, my Fullscale started in 2018 and COVID really helped, propel a lot more companies to think about hiring remote. And if you're thinking about hiring remote, you can hire globally, right? Like, it's not much different.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it was an interesting period. Like you had a little bit more buffer to sort of find your feet and build the business in 2018. We started September of 2019 to build, went to market in January of 2020.
Yeah.
And, everyone was like, well, I don't want to make any decisions like at all right now. But then on the back of that, I think that it's had a massive shift in the mindset. Particularly, I would say like in the US, people are already pretty open to it. I think like culturally, Americans are quite open to like try things. And if they fail, they fail, but they give it a go. Whereas other, I would say like across Europe, particularly like the UK and in Australia, a lot more hesitant or reluctant to sort of jump on something until it's like tried and tested and really proven success. So, I would say that on the back of COVID, we've also seen like quite a bit of acceleration because it's worked. Everyone has to work remote, and lo and behold, you can, it's not just about reducing your costs, but you can find really great talent that can deliver, I would say in some cases at a higher output than local talent.
Well, so everybody debates like with a business idea. With business, is it the ideas or the execution? And clearly, you had the idea, but I always feel like it's something else that's really the struggle, and it's the delivery and distribution. It's like, how do you scale this thing? So you got the idea, hiring Filipinos and offering them for other people is a great business idea. How did you figure out how to scale it? And like, okay, how do I sell this? Who am I going to sell this to? How did you figure out that part of it?
So I can't take all the credit here. Maybe on the sell side, it's definitely where my sweet spot lends itself to. But my co-founder, and now we've brought on another business partner, the two of them, very, very operationally savvy. So sort of when we were building the business and the framework around it, I was thinking about how can we position ourselves so that we can, attract the right caliber of client base. And my co-founder, Lippy, was really focused on operationally how to approach it. And on the back of that was sort of born our second business, Escala, this process improvement consultancy. But essentially, I guess there's like several different ways or several different stages. And to sort of relate it back to anyone listening, I'm talking obviously, or Matt and I are talking about, Filipino recruitment or BPO agencies. But ultimately, we built the initial model. We built sort of this base case operation where, you come in, we documented the, client experience or user experience, understanding each of the incremental stages. And then as we started to get wins on the board, that was when we started to look at, what do the unit economics look like? How many, for example, placements does each recruiter need to make in order for this to be a viable business? What are going to be the areas inside of the business that actually see us, break or thrive? And I would say, we were having a chat before, but we also, like you, in our first 18 months grew to about 120 people, and we grew too fast. Like honestly, today we're at about 80.
We had the same problem.
And when you're trying to build when you're trying to build the plane while it's flying, things are obviously going to go wrong. And one of the lessons that I definitely learned when you talk about scaling businesses is that you really have to have visibility across like how each of the pieces of your business connect, rather than sort of like putting your closing your eyes and saying, you just build the client success function and I'll build the sales funnel and you build, the recruitment component, because ultimately all those systems need to talk to one another and there needs to be a central point or a vision around the business.
I mean, so figuring out all those phases of the business is challenging, but I'm still curious, how did you figure out the sales side of it? Was that through your process and improvement company, like that part of it, and that helped drive a lot of the sales and awareness to the business? Like how did you really specifically grow the sales side of it?
So from the sales side of it, how we grew to where we sit today, I think there's a few things. So the first component of it is like very tied toward our collective ethos, and what we believe in is value creation. How do we focus on adding value at every single stage of an interaction? So even sitting here and talking to you, Matt, on this podcast, the last thing I'm thinking about is how do I get someone who's listening in to buy or place talent with us? All I'm thinking in my head is how do I create enough value for someone listening in so that they can take something away and be in a better place than they were before listening to this podcast. And so when I talk about the sales experience specifically, what we would do is, we built really robust recruitment processes. And so I put together, for example, presentations on how to recruit, retain the top talent from the Philippines, or how to build remote teams. And I would really go into detailed steps of each of the things that need to happen, speaking on whether it's podcasts or on stages, closed communities, how to systemize your business to scale. We would just give away free value as much as we possibly could in these communities that would have us speak. And, lo and behold, each time people would be like, can I have the deck? That's amazing. I've learned so many things on the back of it. And, I think our name just grew on the back of that. So I would say, like, to simplify it, a lot of these closed communities and like niche communities was where we cut our teeth and got our first breaks. And then I think, the reality is, and I would imagine it's the same for you, is when you build a good business, when you build a good service or a good product, 60% of our growth comes from existing businesses or existing clients that we work with. So every time someone comes and hires with us, on average, they're hiring 3+ people because it went really smoothly. They're now reducing their operating costs, finding great talent, and they're saying, well, get me 2 or 3 more people that can really sort of make my business all that it can be. So I would say that's sort of the highest level view, but I can go again. I'm the marketing and sales guy, and I can go channel by channel and strategy by strategy if you wanted to go down that path.
Yeah, I was just curious, that the hardest part of every company is always sales and marketing. Like I was in Phoenix with a big group of startup founders a couple weeks ago that were all bootstrapped companies, and every one of them in the room had the exact same problem. It was sales and marketing, growth. How do we grow faster? How do we scale? Like that's always a challenge. And for companies like ours, I think it's especially difficult when you're trying to compete with hundreds of other companies from India and all over the world, right? Especially on software development for us. The big thing for us is sales is usually driven very heavily on referrals and trust, and somebody that knows you or knows of you and inherently trusts you in some way. Because otherwise you're just the random person that is cold calling somebody or spamming somebody and they don't know you. And trust is really critical. You see that from what you do, like the content and all that stuff that you provide creates a lot of trust. Similar story.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, I would also share as well. Like I've probably been on, I don't know, 300-400 podcasts.
Yeah.
Trying to sort of communicate this value proposition and messaging, not about work with us, but here's the type of talent that you can expect to hire, or here's some tips on how you understand who you can bring in, or what it's going to cost you, or what are the hidden gems of things that you didn't realize you could delegate, but you can, or all these things. So I think like that's definitely, you hear it time and time again. People are like, I saw, I didn't even sit in our sales function for Multiply Me. So, our team will say like, oh, we saw Yoni on a podcast and he's talking about this and it really piqued my interest. I would say like another thing that I've now worked on as well is like SEO strategy as well. And how do we actually not just sort of rank and drive a lot of impressions and clicks, but like, how do we actually give people value as well? Like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lead magnets of like high value content where, we can then start to actually have a conversation with them. So that's become, or is becoming much more central to the strategy. Coming back to it, it's how do we lead with value?
Yeah. Love it. I think that's a really great suggestion for those that are listening. So love to talk more about what you just mentioned though. Like why do people work with you and the types of roles that they hire, and give us a little breakdown of like all the different kinds of roles that you help people with. Obviously there's things with marketing or virtual assistants. Like give us a breakdown.
So we actually have a great ebook that I'm happy to shoot a link over to. We literally just finished updating it. We update it twice a year, and it's the top 100 roles to hire in the Philippines and the salaries of what you should be paying, not what does it cost to work with us, but what you should be paying. And, for us, we initially sort of cut our teeth and worked with a lot of e-commerce businesses. So roles like, Google AdWords specialists, Meta or Facebook media buyer, content writers, designers, Shopify developers, like those were a lot of the initial roles. Obviously customer support. We found ourselves in like some interesting, verticals that I originally had no idea what they were, but you sort of find yourself in interesting places at times. We place a lot of people in like construction and home services, like roles like estimators, and roles like site surveyors and quantity surveyors. We found our way through the EOS entrepreneurial operating system community. We place a lot of like fractional CFO supporting talent, bookkeepers, accountants, accounts payable, receivable. So I would say like we still are probably largely on the marketing, project management or project managers, operations managers, and the designers and those roles that I'd mentioned just before, but have definitely started to break into a slew of other verticals. I mean, we were talking before we jumped on. Obviously, our business models are somewhat different. I would say yours is like more of a white glove solution when it comes to like the service delivery of development. It's not our strongest suit finding development, like hardcore development. Like I would imagine you're like C++ and Angular, and you've got, React and Laravel and Vue.js, and like that's I'm probably speaking your language.
Hey, yeah, you know it.
Yeah, yeah. So again, I know enough to be dangerous, but that's not our sweet spot. Go to Matt for those types of things. We're sort of really helping operators expand on their team's capabilities from an executional standpoint all the way up to sort of middle management. Whereas, you're really coming to someone like you for very specialized, either like ongoing or project related software development things.
So if I'm listening right now and I'm thinking, man, I would love to hire one of these roles you just mentioned, like marketing assistant or whatever, what do you think those companies need to be successful before they do this? Like, what do they need before they would reach out to you and say, hey, I need to hire an SEO expert or whatever?
Fantastic question. I wish more people would come into hiring in general. Forget us, but hiring in general. Really sort of thinking through those steps. So I would say, from my lens, the first thing that you need to look at is, before you even go to a job description, is looking at your business needs and understanding, one, let's talk about different stages of your business. If you're sort of early stage, and you're trying to figure out who the first person is that you'd like to hire, one approach I would look at is saying, right, well, how am I spending the bulk of my time? And what are the tasks that I should easily be able to hand off? So what are things that are central to a specific delivery? So don't try and hand off your design work and your media buying and your finances and wrap this into one jack of all trades and master of none, but saying like, right, I'm doing a lot of media buying because I'm an agency. So having someone who's very analytical and has the capabilities to pull reports or buy media or focus on that one task. So really understanding, where am I spending my time and what can I hand off? If I'm in a larger business, and even if you're just by yourself, I would look at it from the lens, like there's a couple of different ways that you build, I would say, a meaningful job description. There's one school of thought or one way where you would define what the mission is for that role. So what does success look like in the role? If you're to hire someone, how do I know that I've not just brought on the right person, but what they are doing is getting me closer to what my business objective is, and then having the outcomes attached to that. So what outcomes need to be true in this person or what they deliver for them to succeed in this mission? And then lastly is, what attributes does this person need to have in order for them to achieve the outcomes and be successful in the mission? So that's sort of one thing that I would look at, is building, that's called the scorecard method. Or another method is the 4 R's: role, responsibility, requirements, results. So building the job description in a way where you really understand, how is this helping, and then interviewing against that. I would say that's the very first step. And that's obviously something that, if anyone works with Multiply Me, we can help them with. But either way, that is what you need to do. And then I would say the next step is, there's some great books on this. I would say one of them is actually called The First 90 Days. But to see success when you bring someone on, if you're clear on how they're going to impact the business and how they're going to fit into achieving that mission, is making sure they're set up for success in that first 90 days. So a lot of people will just say, shadow me for the first few weeks, you'll get the hang of it, and then you'll do whatever the tasks are. If you actually invest the time to plan and say, right, these are the processes that you'll be working and attached to, these are what your KPIs, performance metrics, and accountabilities are that are attached to your specific mission and outcomes, then you're going to see a lot more success. And if you can find a way to document all of that, where it doesn't require you to step into every single answer and drive yourself nuts, and actually do the converse of what you're trying to achieve, and that's creating more time for yourself rather than now having to onboard this person, I would say those are, just a handful of the critical steps. Is so to really simplify what I said, be clear on impact, build that mission, outcome, and attributes, and then have a very clear onboarding process where they understand what they're coming into, what their quick wins are, and they have a reference point of what they can come back to so that you are not the bottleneck.
I feel like a lot of the challenge a lot of entrepreneurs have, like, hey, I need to hire somebody to do this digital marketing or whatever it is. You're saying, well, you should define their process and what they're going to do, their KPIs, all this kind of stuff. But the reason that they need to hire that person is they don't have time to do this work, let alone define all that stuff. Or maybe even know how to define all that stuff, right? You're like, I don't know anything about marketing. I've been fumbling around with it. I need an expert to come in and figure this thing out. I mean, do you feel like your team can still be that expert, or do you feel like you have to define all these things and really have all this stuff for them?
So I'm gonna mess up the quote here because I haven't stopped to think about it. But slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. And so I would say that if it's something that you are, let's take, there's sort of two examples here that I would lean on. One is you're an expert, you're really good at what you do, but you need an extension of time. And in order to achieve that, you just need to provide guidance to someone who can continue to upskill and free up more time. That's sort of one aspect. The other is I have no idea about marketing. Let's stay on this frame of logic. I have no idea about marketing, but I want to bring someone in to do that work. Now, I would be reluctant to, for example, try and build an SEO function where you need an on-site developer who understands, SEO optimization for web pages, a specialist that can actually tell you these are the keywords that we need to be attacking, and this is the type of content that we need to create, and we need to go and build these backlinks, and we need a content writer to actually produce the content and make sure that it's SEO optimized. You need these three people. If I had no idea how to build, what good SEO looks like, I wouldn't personally go down that path. And so a lot of the advice I give people is if you're going to go and build remote teams, and we might have a difference of opinions here, so I'd love to hear your position on this too. But I would personally advise people and say, don't try and bring in a CMO or a senior marketer to build out your whole function that's Philippines based if you don't know enough to be dangerous. I would look at it first as build an extension of your capabilities, and then slowly but surely, so you can augment it. You could have a remote professional consultant who costs a very high hourly ticket rate, build the structure and the strategy and provide guidance. But when you're trying to build a marketing function, again, just staying on this sort of focus, a lot goes into it. And if you're having a really expensive person build out all these capabilities, pretty quickly it's going to cost you into the six figures, and you probably won't have moved as quickly as you'd have liked.
Well, so I think the follow-up question is, do you think they need some in-house expertise and leadership in whatever the job function is? Or do you think they can hire somebody, directly from the Philippines that brings all of that leadership and all that expertise in the role? Or do you think they need some in-house leadership for whatever the role is?
I think it would be dependent on the role itself. So just to highlight some examples, we were talking, we literally on the podcast spoke about podcasting being a great way to build trust and to generate opportunities from a new business perspective. I've got a podcast outreach specialist, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have any experience in reaching out to trying to get on podcasts, but she has that expertise. She knows the tools to see what's a highly listened to podcast that has great engagement. She knows how to get the email, like she knows how to approach that entire thing. And so something like that, I feel very comfortable outsourcing to her, or maybe not the right word, but handing over to her internally inside of the business to be accountable for. And it's quite autonomous. What I would be reluctant to do is to sort of go too far up the tree, so to speak, and expect someone to sort of build that entire strategy. So I have an SEO specialist that, for example, she's really talented. She uses SEMrush. She understands, how to track everything. She builds the reports. She's building insights. But I'm coaching her and saying, okay, like this, she'll be able to derive the insight. But then I'll say, I need you to go further. And what I need you to do is help me understand why did we jumped 400 backlinks in a month. What was the activity that actually drove that outcome? She'll get to the answers, but she needs a little bit more guidance. So like there is incredible talent, people that are much more talented than me. I'd tell you all my management consulting team are much more talented than I am. The only thing I would say is that you sort of just need to be realistic as to sort of how far, and this would be, again, not just in the Philippines, I would say in any business, if I'm to try and hire someone in a role that I know nothing about and they don't have the proven track record and I can't actually see that, then it's a risk.
Well, I think software development is very much the same with this. Like we have over 60 clients that we work with, and the ones that are the most successful have some form of dev leadership in-house, right? If you came to me and you're like, I don't know anything about software development, I need to hire a software developer and they're magically going to come in and solve all of my problems. Like, it's very difficult for that to happen. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's much more difficult, right? Like, it works way better if you have some in-house leadership that knows what needs to be done. The work is well defined. You have the requirements, you have the roadmap, you have the expertise, all this kind of stuff. But you just need help. You're like, I need more people to help do the work, but I know what work needs to be done. And I think part of the reason I bring this up is I feel like this is part of the struggle that some people have. They're like, they need help, but maybe they don't even know what they need or how to do the work. And they think magically they're going to hire somebody from the Philippines for $1,000 a month or whatever, and that they're magically going to solve all their problems. But maybe if it's booking a podcast, they could, or helping do some content writing or whatever. But it's not bringing like a lot of strategy or a lot of leadership. Probably it's more execution of some types of tasks.
Yeah, I totally agree, and there's there's levels to it, right? Like if I look at how our consulting projects go, I'll get on a discovery call initially, and I'll help to put together the proposal, which the consulting team could actually do as well as I could, probably even better. They'll manage the entire project end to end without me even getting involved in really anything. Like, they're really, really capable in what they are specifically delivering. But what I would say is that, again, with any, like the way I sort of look at the world is that, it's like augmented or geographically dispersed teams. Like, I don't look at sort of the offshore, onshore, or like, it's like, that's my Filipino team and that's my local team. It's like, this is my collective team, and everyone has their skill sets and they bring a tremendous amount to the table. I think some like a history lesson for everyone listening, and I think Matt, you would likely be quite across this, but if you look at the Philippines, there's just some really interesting stats. Like, the first is that the population's 120 million people. So you're looking at something circa a third the size of the United States. And the whole business process outsourcing space really started up about 30 years ago in the Philippines, where 20 odd years ago, you had 3% of the population with a college degree. Today, 20 years on from that moment, we're looking at about 13%. So, what this is to say, and I can continue to rattle off facts around it, but one of the really interesting things is when you look at a country like the US that has literally had hundreds of years of like higher education baked into it, and this has become like a generational thing, and education is core. For a lot of the people that are working now in the Philippines, they're like first or second generation higher education qualified. So they've literally moved from being, farming land their parents might have done or something to that degree, to actually working in front of a computer.
Yeah.
Like,
you
this
just
is
described
where,
my wife.
so that's exactly it, is that, the reality is the capabilities are there. And I think if we look 20 more years into the future, then you're going to see Filipinos rivaling Americans, especially with the work ethic and the culture that exists, in Asian countries, but specifically in the Philippines in this case. Like, we're going to see this massive shift in time, and it just takes time to play catch up. So right now, you get some really strong middle managers. And again, both of us are making sweeping generalizations here. So, take it with a grain of salt. Like, there are some incredibly talented people, and people that are much more talented than I am, by a long way. But just sort of staying with this sort of looking at the masses here, you're seeing this evolution of an emerging world country, and you're now getting really high levels, sort of, in my experience, like up to middle management. I've not been able to
Yeah.
find a CMO or a COO or like a C-suite person, but our sort of department heads are incredible. The
Hmm.
like I'm blown away at their ability to deliver, and this is in such a short sort of time span when I look at sort of what my heritage looks like growing up in a first world country.
One of my favorite stats I always tell people is there's more people fluent in English in the Philippines than there are in England, which
It's
blows people's minds, which is
it's
true. Nobody thinks about the Philippines in English, but that was one of the main reasons that I was drawn there. In 2018 when I started doing this, is software development is so much about English, and when you hire people around the world in different places, that level of English fluency and accents and all the different stuff varies wildly. But in the Philippines, it's very easy to find excellent people that's easy to communicate with. And you described my wife. My wife was, her parents lived out in the provinces in the countryside, extremely, extremely poor. My wife was the first to graduate from college in the family, and was became a teacher and stuff. But it's definitely a country that is developing, and things are changing very quickly. And my company has 300 employees, and I would say we can even see a big difference in the ones that we interview for a job that are like 20 to 25 versus the ones we have that are 35 and they're in their 40s and up. Just and part of it, I think, is technology, right? The younger ones have grown up more with social media and cell phones, smartphones, Netflix, YouTube. They have all these things that we do, and it's creating a very smart workforce that's more savvy. One of my nephews over there is 9 or 10 years old, and in their household, they don't speak a lot of English. With my mother-in-law and my father-in-law that he lives with, they don't really speak a lot of English. He's fluent in English from watching Netflix and YouTube and all this stuff, and they do some English at school. But it just blows me away, like how good his English is for how little he speaks it, like at home. But anyways, it's really changing the work environment and who you can hire over there very quickly. But I think the number one issue, it all comes down to opportunity, right? Like, these people have to have opportunity to learn and do these things. Like you said, it's hard to find somebody who's a CMO or a COO or whatever. There's not a lot of opportunities to do those jobs there, right? So a lot of people just never rise to do that because there's just not a lot of opportunities. And that'll continue to change as well. We have a really great CFO that we hired over there who was phenomenal. But she got all of her experience working remotely for other companies. And then we are able to hire her to be our CFO.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's probably one of the stronger, skill sets is finance functions. But I think like the other angle, for everyone listening in, is not just how great the Philippines is, and if you can, build this high value leverage from emerging world countries like the Philippines, but we're living in a climate right now where it's so challenging to get ahead. The minimum wage in Australia, for example, is close to like $21 an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when you
Dang.
look at that as like, you can work at a cafe and make that kind of money, as an example, it's very hard to get people in to make it actually make sense from a like, you're starting to pay people six figures for relatively low cost or low skilled roles,
Pretty low value jobs.
And as we see sort of these macroeconomic trends with inflation, and particularly in the US, you hear about how much more expensive bread is today than it was 2 and 3 years ago, and just the basic household needs that you need to purchase on the daily. And so when you start to think about it as a business owner, or as someone who's trying to build a business, then the only way that you're actually going to be able to stay competitive is by finding ways to be able to churn out the same quality of work at a price point that allows you to build in meaningful margin. Because I mean, personally, my dream is to not be doing any of this for money, and to be actually just making the world a better place. But I definitely look at this from the lens of saying, well, you're actually, we have a mission to really be that connective bridge between first world and emerging world countries here. And there really is becoming, and will continue to become, this codependency in the most positive way possible, whereby in order for Western businesses to remain profitable, they need to invest in emerging world talent, and emerging world talent can continue to create better opportunities for themselves by upskilling and working with Western countries. And so this goes to this whole global augmentation comparative to sort of like, I'm just going to outsource that to some low-level VAs and get some, subpar, task-based work, where if you're not delegating responsibility and accountability to someone where they are taking that on, then you're ultimately the end of that task list. And you haven't really achieved sort of the scale and the profitability and all the things that you desire trying to build, a more meaningful business.
I helped a friend of mine here. He owns a ticketing business that sells like concert and sports tickets. And he had like 50 to 75 local employees here in Kansas City. And he really struggled to hire people and retain them. And they were doing some basic data entry and processing of orders and stuff. And he was paying people $15, $20 an hour trying to do this work here locally. Really struggled to get people to even want to work there, to hire people, do the work. He ended up hiring some of my wife's friends and my wife's sister, and has hired 150 people in the Philippines and moved all the work there. And the people that he hired there, he only pays $4, $5, $6 an hour, something like that. And they are the happiest people in the world. Like, they love these jobs. They would kill for these jobs. And it's when people hear that, a lot of them don't understand. They're like, what's $4 an hour or $5 an hour? That's crazy. Why would they love this job? Because the most amount of money my sister-in-law ever made before was $1.50 an hour working in a call center for Expedia. So making $4, $5, $6 an hour for an American-based company working remote is like the best job you can get. Like, it's an amazing, amazing job.
And again, just throwing out some of these like stats and insights, as you move away from, these major cities like Manila, Davao, and Cebu and so on, and you move more into the provinces, like the cost of living can be something like 80% less than what it is in the US. So, if you're making, $20, $30 an hour in the US in a place that is, middle America, you can, land is relatively inexpensive. The cost of building a house is going to be mostly what you invest in the actual materials, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, that's not bad. That's a pretty good wage. And so like, for the guys that we're hiring, I would say that, on like our sort of average salary that we're hiring out at is closer to about $1,500 a month in terms of this caliber of talent. That's like the cost.
You can close $9 to $10 an hour.
Exactly. But then again, when you wash that against having a PPC, a senior Google AdWords specialist in the US, you might be paying them, circa $90,000 to $120,000 a year. Yeah. So when you sort of back solve that and you say, I want to pay $30,000 a year or $25,000 a year or whatever it is, you're like, I am saving such a crazy amount of money for someone who can deliver at the same capabilities, or in many cases better. Coming back to sort of the work ethic, one of the things that I've found, and I'd be shocked if you didn't find it the same, Matt, is that like often people will burn themselves out. You're not getting the feedback loops all the time that you need to actually hear them saying like, they need to get it right. And, a big part of what we do, and I would say like for our internal team members, we probably have one of the most favorable leave policies I've ever seen. I think people get something like 26 days off a year through our sort of program.
Does that include the holidays, or that's just PTO?
That's inclusive of holidays.
Oh, because they get like 20 holidays a year all by themselves.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
So our employees get 35 days. So our employees get like 35 days. Oh yeah, my favorite is when like a month ago they moved a holiday. Like it was supposed to be on a Thursday, and they're like, I know it's on a Friday now. Like, how did you decide this week? Like, you couldn't have decided this like months ago. Like, it's what?
It's crazy. It's honestly you'll just sometimes get like a couple times. It's a couple times a year. It's like, we gotta, and you either have to pay 200% or everyone gets the day off. So it's like it's a crazy thing. I mean, you can build the right contractual agreements to say you are going to follow, this US based program, and that's how we're going to pay you, and you can sort of find your way through those things. But ultimately, it's maddening.
Well, we've got just a couple minutes here to wrap this up. I want to ask you, what is the weirdest role that somebody contacted you and wanted you to hire for? Like the weirdest job description or weirdest role?
I would say it would be hard to place like the weirdest role. What I would say is like very common and people don't realize that this is just never going to work is when people want, I like to call it the creative director, CFO. People will come to you and look for this unicorn individual where they're not able to find someone that looks like that onshore, and all of a sudden they think, well, I'm going to find that person in the Philippines. So, I'd say, well, while I can't give you the name of a specific role that was like bizarre to me, I would have told you like site surveyors and quantity surveyors was something that I was, totally unaware of historically. I would say that the weird things to me is that people try and solve problems that they can't solve locally abroad.
Okay, my last question for you is, I heard you say this a few times in our conversation today, and it's normal in American English. You said that you know enough to be dangerous. How many times have you said that or something like that to a Filipino and they looked at you very weird? Because I said that exact same thing to one of our employees one day, and they asked me if they should be scared.
I would say it happens more often than I would actually be aware of because it's such a polite culture that many times they won't even tell you that like I have no idea. But one thing I get a lot of is noted. Noted.
Well, the part of the point here is like Filipino English and American English, Australian English, like they're all a little different, right? And so we have a lot of metaphors and a lot of slang that they aren't necessarily familiar with. And my wife is from the Philippines, so obviously I've lived through this for the last 5 years. Like every week I would say something to her and she'd just look at me like I was weird. She's like, what are you talking about? So it's been a fun adventure. But those are some of the fun nuances that even though it's like, oh, they know English, but it's like own flavor of English,
Definitely. And it comes from so many different avenues, but I'd say heavily US influenced.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. Definitely check out Yoni's company, Multiply Me, if you're thinking about hiring people in the Philippines. If you're looking to hire software developers, that's our expertise at Fullscale. Check us out at fullscale.io as well. Well, Yoni, thank you so much for doing this today.
It was a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you, sir.